All right, let's call this meeting to order. It is 6 p.m. and I want to be respectful of everyone's time on this special meeting night. So I'm going to skip introductions and we'll get right into it. We're all here for a health and safety update that was prompted a week earlier than we were going to have some discussions because of new guidance that came out from the CDC. So that's why we're all here tonight. Before I kind of throw it out to the administration or the rest of the folks up here, I'd like to say a few things. I know that, you know, I'm looking at dozens of emails that have come in the last like 24, 48 hours. And you can really tell how personal this hits people, right? Whether it's folks saying, absolutely, we need to keep masks, or folks who say, you know, we need to stop masks. It's very personal, and it hits home for everyone in one way or another. And a lot of those folks, right, at one point said, thank you for following CDC guidance, and now they're saying, wait, don't listen to them because now they're telling us not to have masks, and we've had the other way around. And the bottom line is, I know everybody is in a different place, and we, as a governing body, have to be, you know, following the same guidance that we've been using this whole time. We can't waffle on that, right? The CDC has given us new guidance, and I think that's what we have to be responsive to. I know that there are concerns about it's going to get worse before it gets better. What about spring break? All I can say is we have to be adaptable and know this isn't like this last final step. We make a decision tonight, whatever it is. It doesn't mean that's the last thing because things do change. So I want that to be very clear to everyone. But I also think that it's very important how we as the adults around our kids talk about it, right? I know there was some concerns about, well, if my kid's the only one wearing masks, they're gonna get bullied, and that's not acceptable. I don't think anybody in here would find that to be an acceptable thing. So I think it's important that we make sure that our kids don't find that to be an acceptable thing. If everybody has to wear a mask, you know, once we're done here, I think it's important to not talk about how terrible masks are around our kids. I mean, that does have an impact on our kids' mental health. So that's just some things I wanted to lay out there for everyone to think about. Personally, tonight, the action, whether we're taking action or just going to have this discussion, right, I feel like we have to be consistent. The CDC has recommended not to have masks for everyone when we're in a medium level like Johnson County is right now. I don't know what we'll be in tomorrow or the next day or the day after that, but currently we're in a medium level, and I think we have to follow that guidance. So that's my take on it. I don't know if, Matt, you wanted more or if you just wanted to throw it out to directors to kind of weigh in.
Well, I think you started us off great there, President Eystone, and I'd echo a lot of the same things you talked about, right, that there's been no perfect solutions here, right? We've been faced with a lot of problems with limited good solutions or definitely not solutions that everybody can agree upon. And, you know, like you said, some people would like to see this continue longer. Some people would have liked to seen it gone a long time ago. I think the thing we've been consistent on is trying to follow the advice from the health institutions, right? We're an education institution, and so we need to take direction from our health partners, local, state, national. We've evaluated all those throughout the pandemic and stayed really closely aligned to our own local Johnson County Public Health and the CDC throughout. And so really our only goal has been throughout that to try to stay consistent, take their advice, keep our students and staff safe, and do the best we can. We know that not everybody's agreed. But I do think it's important for us to have trust in those institutions and try to follow their guidance and reflect that. And so, you know, the other consideration is knowing the position we put our administrators and teachers in to be able to enforce that in the boots on the ground that they're serving our students in and knowing what that guidance is. And so really our recommendation to you this evening is that, you know, for the existing mask requirement that we've had in place in the school district is that we really would adjust that now to reflect what the CDC is telling us to do based on that guidance between the low, medium, and high levels, and that we would adjust our protocols accordingly depending on where we are in that situation. And now today we know that we're in the medium as was released on Friday, and that we would proceed in that direction. I think that would be the advice from our team. But for us to be consistent and to follow through, I think President Eystone did a nice job in talking about where we've anchored our decisions and in our direction following that, and I think that would keep us consistent with that approach.
I'm just going to jump in. I'll be quick. You know, since March of 20, since all this started for most of us, we've been faced with decisions that we know however it pans out, half the people will be upset at us. But what I was a little bit relieved to see this time around, that 99% of the emails and communications that we received as a board, as a whole, was that of people just passionately stating their beliefs one way or the other, either for mask or dropping mask mandates, but it remained respectful. And again, 99% of them understood that we're the governing body that ultimately have to make the decisions, but they wanted to share their thoughts. So those listening and those out in the audience, thank you for sharing your thoughts either way, and understanding that we're doing a job that we were elected to do. We may not always make the decision that you are happy with, but we make a decision following what we have always said has been our North Star since this started, which was CDC guidelines and recommendations, as well as trying to protect our students, staff, and administrators in our buildings to the best of the ability with the tools that we have at the time. So I don't think we can walk back from that, following CDC guidelines. We have to stay true to that, because if we change or waffle on that, I truly do believe we put at risk the community's trust and how we make our decisions. Going back on that sets us up for failure, in my opinion.
I'll just add on to that a little bit, Ruthina. You know, because the point is well made that we are not health experts and we're not public health experts, and we're here to hire educational experts who are making public health decisions. And you know, one way to gauge feedback is to gauge community feedback, and one way to do that's through elections, right? That's not very frequent. Another way would be through community commenters. Certainly that does have an impact, and also through the emails. I would say, you know, in the past, probably reflecting the community we live in, at least 10 to 1, if not 20 to 1 emails were pretty one-sided supporting a mask mandate. You know, it in the past has been very, if you were going to go by community opinion, it was by far one-sided very heavily. This time it's not. You know, it's a little all over the place. I think the important thing, though, is because I don't just gauge how many people are writing emails, but what the content of those emails are. And if we were to follow the advice of the emails, we could do totally opposite things. People who have articles that we should read that prove their point, absolutely on opposite sides of whatever issue. And as somebody who has a full-time job that I get paid for to go to, and then who comes here and volunteers time, I don't have time to become a public health expert and weigh through all of the articles everyone comes across on their own. And so I am thankful that we have organizations like the CDC and like the Iowa Department of Health and the Johnson County Department of Public Health, that we can look at all of that data and let the experts weigh in. If somebody says they don't trust those experts, okay. However, that's the folks that are hired to do that job and the professionals that do that job. And if people disregard that, you know, I'm going to keep that as our North Star. And I think that's what's been consistent. You know, I do think that there are people, staff and students, who are immunocompromised. And I don't think it's fair to say, well, they can have school at home. I don't think that's right. And so I do know that as we move through this process and we identify those folks, I would hope that we are very responsive to enforce those mask mandates around people whose lives are truly at danger. And just because it might be 0.01%, that doesn't mean that person doesn't matter. I do get frustrated when people are like, oh, it's a 99 whatever survival rate. Well, that doesn't discount those people who would not have otherwise died except for this disease and this pandemic. And so we do have a job to protect those individual students, and I agree to be consistent. We have been consistent that we're going to follow the experts, and I think we need to follow their advice.
I'll pick up where JP left off. I think the federal court litigation has given a really nice roadmap so that if we do have students that are immunocompromised or medically vulnerable, I don't think what we're doing tonight is saying that we're never going to require a mask anywhere in the building, because if those students require masking as part of an IEP or 504 plan, I would anticipate, well, I would require this district to follow the law and craft an IEP or 504 plan that requires that student the ability to attend school safely. I believe that that process is in place. I believe that our administration is going to implement the process and follow the law. And so I think it's what you said is exactly right, JP. It's scary for those families right now, but I don't think we're leaving them with only the go online as the choice. We are 100% committed to providing a safe environment as necessary, and part of that may be requiring masks. It's just going to be done on an individualized basis, and I think that's an important thing to note. I do also want to say this. I try not to use this position as a soapbox and spout off, but if you'll indulge me tonight, I am pretty frustrated, and I just want to get off my chest a lot of what we're seeing in the comments of why we should continue masking is a lot of criticism of the CDC. And we saw it before from people who didn't think we should be masking. And I have worked for the federal government since I was 19, and if you want to do the math, that's almost 25 years. And this criticism of our institutions who are filled with public servants who are just trying to do their job is absolutely uncalled for. And I think really what I've come to learn is the worst ramification from the prior administration is to impugn this deep distrust of our government institutions and make people across the political spectrum, from what we're seeing from some of the emails today, that I don't want to be political, I'm not being political, but a deep distrust of government. I've heard that the only reason the CDC changed these guidelines was because the situation in Ukraine was getting out of hand and that Biden needed cover to draw his attention away from that. That is just absurd. It is ridiculous to say that. The CDC is filled with people who, like you said, JP, do this all day, and it's their job to make medical, scientific decisions that are reasoned and based on data, and I trust the CDC. And I will be the first to say that we need to all mask up again if we get to high levels of community transmission, because that's what the CDC is telling us. But I would warn people who are being critical of the CDC now, this is how we get to politicians in Des Moines standing up and telling us that our librarians should be jailed for distributing obscene material. It's the deterioration and the attack on our institutions of government that are filled with public servants that lead to attacks on our educational students. And I am fed up and frustrated and just at the end of my rope with it. So that's what I wanted to get off my chest. Clearly think that we should follow the CDC tonight. And that's, if we vote, that's how I will be voting.
I'm so glad you don't use it as a soapbox.
Regularly.
I mean, anyone else can certainly weigh in, but it's not required that we all say our piece, but I want to make sure everyone's heard that wants to be heard. So go ahead, Charlie.
It's a very illuminating remarks, and it's a good soapbox, Lisa. I have a couple of things. I think Lisa outlined one of my concerns is that we're still bound by the federal court's rulings on our ability to meet the requirements of the ADA and IDEA, I think. Okay. And I think that's one of the things that I would be expecting us to continue to do, Matt, okay, at least from my perspective. Okay. The other thing is, while I definitely respect the Center for Disease Control, and I've not had the least inclination to be critical of anything that they've done in this pandemic, there's a couple of things I'm curious about. One of them has to do with making sure, or trying to ensure that we do craft our policies and practices in the classrooms in terms of face covering requirements so that kids who are immunocompromised and have other higher risk levels, that we're able to provide a safer environment for them. It's commensurate with their health issues. And I think that's something I would like to, even if that involves, as I think some of you suggested, requiring masking for all the kids in a building or some other measure. And I'm also interested in having some description of how we can look at our face covering requirements when kids are at school, when students have younger kids at home, less than 5, who are obviously not able to, there's not a vaccine available for them at the moment. And I don't know if the CDC's guidance addressed that issue or not, if their notion is that not
Trying to get the microphone on there, Charlie, to answer you. So I think to Lisa's point about sharing, how as institutions consider these things, I think we have to have some element of trust to know they understand the school-based environment, right? They understand that we serve students that are not yet eligible for a vaccine. They understand that we're serving students on IEPs, 504s, immunocompromised students, and that we do have a path, or that we're hoping to continue to develop a path for those that are immunocompromised or have those special needs, or that are not yet eligible for a vaccine. And so all of those things had to factor into their recommendation to do this for communities in medium category. They understand the nature of a school environment. Now, does that make it perfect, or does that necessarily make that situation individually better for that student? No, and I think that'll be some of our work moving forward, right, is that as people have those concerns and bring forward those requests, then what do we do, right? And how do we respond? And it's hard to have a district-based response to those because most of those happen in individual team meetings, and that happens through that IEP team process. And so to say, well, this is going to be the district response to all those situations isn't possible, right? Because we know that those determinations are made through that team process. So those would be a few of the things I would think about, Charlie, when we ask the question, well, did the CDC address that in their guidance? Maybe not explicitly, but I think there's some implicit understanding that they know what K-12 school environments or PK-12 school environments, who they are and who they're serving.
You make a good point, Matt, and I hadn't actually thought about it quite in that perspective. I would ask, as we proceed here over the next several days and weeks, that if we understand more of the CDC's thinking about those specific areas, perhaps we can communicate that to people too, okay?
Sure, we will, and I think this is something we'll want to, we haven't done anything through the pandemic where we've made a decision and then not come back to it. I think that's something we should be proud of too, that we've continued to check in. We've had health and safety on our agendas for going on 2 years now, right? And so this will be something we need to continue to share updated information, updated guidance with. We know that there's still litigation in play to this that could also affect whatever decision we make here tonight into the future, and then also inform some of our ability to address some of those administrative remedies for families as well.
Okay. And then lastly, I think the one piece of data I looked at is that we have our COVID dashboard, I think, indicates that we've had something like 2,450 kids this year, is that right, that have been diagnosed with COVID infection. And I think, as I remember, that we have been really, we haven't found really striking evidence that kids who contract COVID, or students who contract COVID, or actually have contracted that, but due to some exposure during the school day in a building. Am I misremembering that, or we just don't know, or not?
I think that's been part of it, Charlie, is it's been pretty hard to determine. We can identify when potential exposures would have happened. Now, if that's the actual exposure that led to the COVID infection, sometimes it's harder, right? So there could have been a time period during the school day where that could have been an exposure that then developed that infection. But we also know that we see the students for maybe 7.5 to 10 hours a day, depending on if they're in activities or just here for the school day, before and after school care. So it's not always easy to know exactly where that happened, but you're right. I mean, there's a significant number of our student population that's had COVID since the start of the year. You know, currently when we look at our numbers, they're in really good shape, right? We have 7 students currently COVID positive, and those numbers are trending nicely right now, but we know we've hit other points where that hasn't always been the case too, so.
And that's a good point too about the infections that have been diagnosed in the last week or so have been quite small. So to me, that's an indication that the ability to transmit the disease to someone at home is maybe very low right now anyway. Thanks, Sean.
I would just like to say that I agree we need to follow the CDC, but I do want to emphasize that we are not out of the woods yet. The pandemic is not over, and we need to be mindful of protecting the vulnerable and encourage others to wear masks to protect those vulnerable who are at school or who go home to loved ones who might be vulnerable. I know my children will continue to wear masks, not because I've asked them to, but just because they feel more comfortable wearing a mask. And I know when I picked up my son at West High yesterday, most of the kids that I saw coming out of the school were wearing masks. And so I thought that was great that students are continuing to choose to wear masks, and you know, hopefully they'll continue to do that if they're comfortable, if that's what they want to do. Some things that I think we can do to make this safer, because you know, what these guidelines say is not that, you know, and it is safer now than it was, say, 8 weeks ago. But what the guidelines aren't really saying, if you take off your mask, you're not going to get sick. What the guidelines are saying is, if you get severely ill, we can take care of you in the hospital. So I think we need to keep that in mind, that we can still get sick and we can still pass it on. If there is a way to improve ventilation in our classrooms as the weather gets warmer, you know, say today, if windows can be open, and these are small things that can be done. I think it would be nice to encourage teachers to model wearing masks if they are willing. I mean, I realize we're not going to make teachers wear masks, but I think if a student sees their teacher wearing a mask, they're going to be less likely self-conscious about wearing their own masks. And I definitely do think we need to revisit this on the 8th and the 22nd when we come back for our regular meeting.
I just want to jump in real quick with the windows. We actually learned a couple, maybe 18 months ago, don't open the windows, because the way the ventilation systems work in the buildings, it actually is worse if the windows get open, the air doesn't circulate properly. So everything else you said was great,
Good.
Jane, but I don't want students to be
Okay.
opening up those windows in the classroom when the weather, because that's actually going to be worse off for the health and safety.
Good to know. Thank you, Lisa.
But they can go outside.
That's what I would say. There, you know, that's something that'll be afforded to us again in the spring, right? That kind of matches, I think, the thoughts of Director Finch there is, you know, when we can take advantage of those opportunities, do it. And sometimes that's easier said than done practically for our staff. But I know there was a lot more of that in the fall when we were able to do it. And so I think those are good opportunities for us to look at, and took some notes on the other comments we've had from other board members here too. So we'll keep working on it. I think those updates, like you said, at the following meetings are going to be important for us to continue, and appreciate also what Jane said, that the pandemic's not over, right? I mean, this is going to be something that we continue.
One other thing, and this is something your team has already done, is the isolation period being reduced to 5 days is contingent on students wearing their masks on days 6 through 10. So I know
Yes.
that nursing staff is already communicating to students that if they come back on days 6 through 10, that they do need to wear a mask.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I should have opened with that too, that we put out that tentative guidance on Monday and yesterday. Anybody that would have been sent home due to a COVID positive case, that, you know, that would have been those days 6 through 10, like Jane said, would be contingent on them wearing a mask. If they don't want to do that, then they would just need to complete the 10-day time period out, and then they could come back.
So I'll just say that I think the CDC's recommendations should be followed, like everyone else has said. I think that we follow those while also reading the context they are given to us in. So the CDC didn't just have 2 sentences to us. They said This is what we're recommending for now, based on the information we have right now. It's the low and medium, that masks will be optional. Of course, there are caveats about how we aren't done with this, and about how the most obvious thing everyone should do is get vaccinated. As I sit here and I see the people sitting around me, I know we are vaccinated and boosted. I would be comfortable taking my mask off if I so wanted, and obviously Director Williams did, and I understand that. The concern we have as an educational institution is we have little kids that can't be vaccinated and boosted yet. And of course, there are people that can't be vaccinated and boosted for specific health reasons. And we have people that are in some way compromised and are more susceptible to greater infection. And all I think of it in this community, all I'm asking for in this community is that we all just care about it. I don't care if you want to vote for somebody and not somebody else. I don't care. All I want us to do is care about each other, which means some kids really did have a hard time wearing masks. It was hard on them. Some kids didn't care, you know? Some kids, it really matters to see those faces. It really does. And I get it. And when we heard comments from everybody, it touched us. We're not robots. We all have kids. This has been a really terrible time. And I really wish we were done with it, right? Like, it's all we want is to be done with this damn thing. It sucks. That's a word I don't even let my kids use. But it does. It's just been a terrible situation. We're not done. It looks like we get to have a break from masks, okay? And I get why. They might come back. I don't know what's going to happen. None of us do. I wish we knew already. The variants were over. Unfortunately, masks are one of our best defenses, even though they stink. I hate wearing it. I do. But they do work, and they don't just work if one of us wears them. It works if the sick kid wears them. And I understand that, you know, we've all heard different pieces of information about that, but this board has decided that we're going to defer to the CDC about masks. I get it. It's something we're going to argue about forever, and arguing, I hate that too. Like, we're all sick of it. We're all sick of it, the conflict that it's causing us. So for now, we lift the mask mandate, and we cross our fingers that we don't end up at a high level again. And then if we do end up at a high level, we're going to have to do what the CDC tells us to do. And I hope people get vaccinated if they can. And that, again, bottom line is, if we could just set our frustrations aside, which is hard to do even for adults at this point in 2 years of really difficult times, and just focus on what can we do to care about the kids? How do we do this? I'm not giving you that answer. I'm just saying every step of the way here, we're just going to have to pause and think, okay, if I can put aside all the stuff that makes me frustrated or angry or, you know, the stuff I see on TV or whatever, what do I do to try to keep the kids from getting sick? And right now, we have a path for that.
All right. So I'll look to you, Matt. Were you going to say something? We all came here not knowing whether we needed to actually, you know, take action versus give you some guidance. I think that, you know, this entire time, we've been in unison in saying we're following the guidance, and we can just say that, that's what we're doing. I would look to you, Matt. Would you prefer that we take some sort of action in that regard, or is direction from the board good enough? I mean, it felt to me like it was unison direction to follow the guidance.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think that is the theme, you know, that we're hearing here this evening. On this particular issue, we haven't really voted on too many COVID-specific issues, but we did vote on this mask requirement following some of that litigation. And so I do think it would be of benefit to adjust the original mask requirement, and I would suggest a motion along the lines of following the CDC recommendations for those different levels. I think one thing we could potentially anticipate, and just even from listening to you guys, is what if we go back to the high category in the middle of the week? Are we going to call a special meeting every time that happens? Or would you be willing to also exert some flexibility to say, if that happens, then Matt and his team can go ahead and employ, a strategy around returning to the mask requirement if it's still available to us at that point. So that would be something to think about with the long term. Maybe you say that's not something we want to do. We wouldn't want to get back together on it. But it seemed a motion around trying to adjust our response to where the CDC recommendations would be a good step at this point. And then if we would need to revisit that in the future, we could sure bring that up.
I have a motion ready.
Go ahead.
I move that the district adjust their mask requirements to match the recommendations from the CDC according to low, medium, or high community levels.
Second.
So I'll throw that out there for more comment. I would say to Matt that, we can approve that or not approve that tonight, and I think that's great. I think we're right on, and I was thinking of when we initially came up with our return to learn plans, right? And when we were going between different learning methodologies, whether it was in person or hybrid or whatever, you had a whole scheme of, if things change, we had to wait for like a week or 2 weeks before we would actually make a change. I would love to see something like that as we move forward to handle if we're going to move. Obviously, I don't think we need to do that tonight, but I think if we revisit it next week or at the meeting after that, something along that line, how to handle it, short term, I think would be a great proposal to see.
I was confused when you started talking about, I think from going way back in the memory here, you were talking about some of those dates we had about like it would begin no sooner than the beginning of the next week
Yeah,
or something like that. Kind of some time to have some people prepare. And so that's certainly something we could talk about and bring back to you guys too about some timeframes we would do that. I think my point was just not trying to wait on a special meeting every time to begin something like that, because sometimes it is dynamic and it changes quickly and we'd want to be able to be
It
responsive
can,
to
and
that.
I think that can be
Yeah.
part of it a bit.
Right.
I don't think anybody here would want us to have a mask one day, no mask the next day, mask the next day, no mask the next day, because it's changing that fast. None of us could handle that, right? So I think we need to be a little more intentional about, the
Well, and I think that's what we have
timeframes
to
of-
understand from the
Yeah.
CDC is just how dynamic is their site going to be as well. Because I don't anticipate looking on the site one day and it kind of fluctuating back and forth like that, but when are they going to do those data draws and how dynamic is that going to be to give us some time? And we're all new to it, right? We just got it on Friday and we're making decisions on Tuesday. So I think, like you said, that'll be good for us to look at and evaluate, because that'd be the worst situation to get into kind of a ping pong environment like that, and it wouldn't be effective at all.
Any further comments?
I was just going to it seems right that we had this special meeting because the guidance change from CDC is pretty dramatic. And I think it's good that we all got together and talked about it. But if we're all going to vote on the motion that we're following the guidance document now is what the guidance document is. And so I don't think that we need a special meeting every time we move to high to low to medium, because what I would like to see is if the guidance changes substantively again, that to me seems like a time that we may want to have a special meeting if a board meeting isn't scheduled in a timely manner. But I don't think that we need to be ping-ponging around. I think if that motion passes, what the direction is follow the guidance.
Anyone else? All right, Kim, I think we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open.
I'm a yay vote, Kim. I can't get logged in.
Kim, I'm a yay vote. Right here.
Thank you, Director Pilcher-Hayek. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Kim? Matt, was there anything else you wanted to hit on health and safety while we're all sitting here?
No, we're going to save the rest of those items for next week. I think we wanted to get some basic steps determined here tonight around the mask issue, and that was the most significant, the reason for the meeting, and we'll come back next week with some of those other protocols as we approach the spring.
All right, thanks, Matt. Thanks, everyone, for your time. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.